Okay, so let's dive in. Have you ever found yourself feeling, I don't know, completely stuck in dating, where you feel like you're doing everything
Yeah.
everything you've been told you're supposed to do, right?
All right, ticking all the boxes.
Exactly. You're being polite, you're attentive, a good listener. Maybe you're the guy who's always offering to pay.
Opening doors, the classic gentleman stuff.
The absolute epitome of the nice guy. And, well, despite all this effort, all this attention you're putting out there, you're still getting that familiar kind of awful sting of rejection.
Yeah, it's a really common frustration.
Maybe you get ghosted after what seemed like a perfectly good first date. Or, you find yourself just perpetually stuck in the dreaded friend zone with someone you really, really hoped for more with.
Or maybe even feeling just unseen.
Totally invisible. Like you don't even register, romantically speaking.
Well, that precise scenario, that really deeply frustrating and confusing pattern, that's exactly where the source material for this deep dive kicks off.
Yeah.
It identifies that experience as, well, incredibly common for guys today. This feeling that the conventional wisdom, the sort of gentlemanly approaches they've been taught, they just aren't delivering the results, the connections they actually want.
Right. Things aren't adding up.
Yeah, the source frames it as a real disconnect between the effort guys are putting in and the outcome they're getting. It leaves them bewildered, often kind of questioning, okay, what am I doing wrong here?
Exactly. And the source we're diving into today, it's a specific video looking at modern dating dynamics. And it really doesn't pull any punches.
No, it's pretty direct.
It presents a pretty stark perspective right from the get-go. It claims, quite bluntly, that the traditional methods so many men rely on, these seemingly right ways of approaching dating, they're simply not working. Not in today's world, anyway.
It argues those very acts, being the ever-available chauffeur, the non-judgmental therapist for her problems, or the human wallet always ready to pay.
Yeah.
That these can actually leave you feeling, and this is the source's phrase, less than desirable. And in the worst case, it says these actions make you, quote, completely invisible in a romantic context.
Wow. Okay. So it's not just saying they don't work, it's saying they actively work against you.
That's the core argument. It doesn't just state it as an observation. It sets out to explain why, from its specific viewpoint, this is happening. It sort of posits that the landscape has shifted and what might have worked or been expected before, now it backfires.
Okay. So our mission then for this deep dive is to really thoroughly unpack the core arguments, the claims, the proposed solutions that are presented only within this specific source material.
Exactly. We're here to explore its perspective, understand why it suggests conventional dating wisdom is failing so spectacularly for some people.
And delve into the alternative approach it proposes, which the source introduces this concept it actually terms Seduction Tech.
And central to that is the whole idea of becoming what it calls the prize man.
The prize man.
Okay. So yeah, over the course of this discussion, we'll be navigating through the source's explanation of what it even means to adopt this prize mentality.
Right.
Then we'll dive into 7 major dating and seduction myths that the source claims are actively holding men back.
7 myths, okay.
And finally, laying out the specific path to transformation that the source outlines through its whole Seduction Tech framework.
Got it. And I think it's really, really important for everyone listening to understand that our conversation today is strictly focused on reporting and exploring the points, the claims, the perspective laid out solely within this source material.
Absolutely crucial. We aren't bringing in outside info. We're not validating these claims ourselves.
No, we're basically acting as guides to help you understand what this specific source is saying about dating and attraction today. Think of it like we're just holding a magnifying glass up to this one particular viewpoint.
A guided tour of one specific perspective. So, let's get started then. Let's unpack this. The source opens by presenting an observation, a dynamic it sees playing out pretty frequently in modern dating.
It calls this the prize mentality, right? And it describes it, at first anyway, primarily from the perspective of how women often carry themselves or behave in dating scenarios.
That's right. According to the source, women frequently act as if they are the prize that needs to be won. They expect men to jump through hoops, as the source puts it.
Jump through hoops.
Just to earn their attention or their time or maybe their affection.
Okay. So the woman is positioned as the goal, the thing to be attained.
Yes, and the source paints a pretty vivid picture of this perceived behavior. It talks about women carrying themselves with this sense of inherent value, almost like a trophy.
A trophy.
Yeah, and within that framework, it suggests that women are constantly, maybe sometimes unconsciously, evaluating or qualifying the men who approach them or show interest.
Like they're screening candidates.
Kind of. And critically, the source says they are quick to discard or, lose interest in those who don't measure up to whatever internal or even external criteria they might be using in that moment.
Right. And the source acknowledges that experiencing that firsthand, feeling like you're being weighed and found wanting, that can be a tough pill to swallow for guys.
Definitely. It describes that frustration of putting yourself out there, offering what you believe is value and good intentions, only to feel like you're just another applicant who's being quickly screened out.
It really taps into that core feeling of vulnerability, doesn't it? And the potential rejection that just comes with expressing any kind of romantic interest.
It does. You step forward, and according to the source's observation, the other person is often in this position of evaluation, and that evaluation can feel, well, harsh and swift sometimes.
So the source grounds its whole argument in this observed dynamic, suggesting this is the reality many men are facing, maybe even if they don't consciously recognize it or understand the mechanics the source is describing.
Precisely. But then here's where the source takes a really interesting kind of counterintuitive turn. And it's really the central premise of its whole approach.
Yeah.
It proposes taking this dynamic. It just observed the idea of the woman acting as the prize and completely flipping the tables, as it phrases it.
Flipping the tables. So men should act like the prize.
That's exactly it. It suggests that men should consciously adopt that very same prize mindset for themselves.
Huh. Okay, that is a flip.
It's the core revolutionary idea presented here. The source argues that women have, maybe instinctively or maybe through cultural conditioning, sort of mastered this approach of carrying themselves as the sought-after entity.
Right.
And the source claims that men can learn the same dynamic and use it deliberately in your favor. It's about shifting the man's position from being the hopeful pursuer, always trying to win the prize,
to becoming the prize himself, the one who is being pursued or at least sought after.
That's the idea. It's presented as a kind of strategic reorientation of your mindset and your behavior within the dating interaction.
Okay, but how does it distinguish that from just being arrogant or, manipulative?
That's a key point. The source attempts to make that distinction. It frames what it calls seduction tech, not as a way to trick or control women, but rather as a set of tools to attract women naturally.
Naturally.
The promise here, according to the source, is pretty significant. By adopting this approach, you won't need to constantly chase. Instead, you will make women want to be around you.
So the attraction becomes more organic, flowing towards the man instead of him having to constantly generate interest.
That's the pitch. And one of the most compelling claims the source makes right up front is about the speed of results.
Ah, the speed.
Yes, it emphasizes that this approach, the seduction tech and the whole prized man mindset, it gets results fast.
Okay, that's a big promise. People feeling frustrated probably want fast result.
Exactly. That promise of efficiency, of rapid transformation, is presented as a major draw by the source. It paints this vision for you, the listener. Instead of the frustration of being invisible or stuck in the friend zone, imagine women actively gravitating towards you.
Showing clear interest.
Making it evident they desire your company, your connection.
So the ultimate goal here, with this whole framework.
The ultimate goal, as the source describes it, is the transformation of the man into what it calls the prized man that practically every woman desires.
Practically every woman. That's a bold claim.
It is. And the source suggests this isn't just about getting a date or two. It implies this transformation in mindset and presence is so profound that it impacts how a man is perceived by women across the board.
And it claims it goes beyond dating, too.
Yes. Importantly, the source claims the implications of becoming this prized man extend beyond just dating and romance, positively influencing other areas of your life as well.
Interesting. So from the source's perspective, it's not merely about learning a few techniques for one interaction.
No, it's about a fundamental shift, a shift in identity and self-perception that changes the entire dynamic of how you interact with and how you're perceived by women.
Moving from a position of maybe neediness or seeking validation
to one of self-assured value. That's the foundation the source builds upon. And before it details the specific blueprint for how to become this prized man, It dedicates a pretty significant chunk of its argument to dismantling what it sees as the main obstacle stopping men from getting there.
The roadblocks.
Exactly. It argues that many common beliefs, a lot of conventional dating advice, it's not just unhelpful, but these are actually, and again, this is the source's language, laws of the universe that have actively worked against you.
Wow, laws of the universe. So subtly sabotaging men's efforts without them even realizing it.
That's the claim, and it frames this next section as tearing down 7 of the most popular myths that are holding men back.
Okay, 7 myths. According to the source, believing these and acting on them keeps men stuck in these ineffective patterns.
Okay.
Let's explore these strictly through the lens of this source material.
All right. Myth number 1 the source tackles is, women want a lover who is also their friend.
Ah, the friend zone trap.
Precisely. The source is quite forceful in asserting this is a classic detrimental trap. It describes the scenario very vividly.
How so?
You meet a woman, you're interested romantically, but instead of signaling that romantic intent or building attraction, you fall into the pattern of becoming her platonic confidant.
Right.
The source lists the roles you end up playing. Her chauffeur, driving her places, her therapist, listening to all her problems non-judgmentally, her human wallet, constantly paying for things.
All the while hoping.
All the while nurturing this hope that by being this indispensable friend, she'll eventually see you in a romantic light.
And the source's conclusion on this?
Stark. And from its perspective, a harsh reality check. Quote, once you're in the friend zone, you're pretty much trapped.
Trapped. Okay, so it sees it as a one-way street. A relational dead end for romance.
That's how it's framed. It argues the dynamic established is fundamentally non-romantic, and trying to transition from that supportive, platonic role into a romantic partner is exceedingly difficult, maybe impossible, within the source's framework.
So the key takeaway the source emphasizes here is
What?
understanding the difference.
Critically important, it says, is learning the difference between friend and lover. It argues that failing to understand and act on that difference is precisely what leads men into the friend zone. You provide all the benefits of a supportive companion.
Without ever being considered for a romantic connection.
Exactly. The source implies you need to establish that romantic frame early on, or at least recognize the distinction and act accordingly.
Okay. Moving on to myth number 2, which sounds closely related.
It is. Myth number 2, women want a shoulder to cry on.
Seems like a natural extension of the first one.
Yeah.
Reinforcing that idea that being maybe too supportive can be counterproductive if you're aiming for romance.
It is, and the source makes a similar point, but focuses more specifically on the emotional aspect. It acknowledges, sure, women are emotional beings, they value emotional connection.
Right.
But the source argues the role of a shoulder to cry on is one they typically fulfill with their friends, not their potential romantic partners.
Okay. And the source's specific claim here is pretty blunt, isn't it?
It is. It says becoming her emotional support animal puts you in a subordinate position.
Ouch. Emotional support animal.
Yeah. It frames that role as one where you are literally kind of below her in status or value within that potential dynamic. You're there to serve her emotional needs without necessarily getting romantic potential in return.
And the source connects this directly to that old saying, nice guys finish last.
It does. It argues that by constantly being available to listen, to comfort, to be, quote, at her beck and call, emotionally or otherwise, you lose all novelty.
No mystery, no excitement.
You become predictable. Your presence is just taken for granted. And you cease to be an exciting or mysterious romantic possibility. The source suggests that the nice guy trap, at least in part, involves becoming this overly accessible emotional resource, which paradoxically extinguishes romantic interest.
So the source argues against taking on that primary role of emotional confidant or constant comforter if your goal is actually romance. It suggests it positions you incorrectly right from the start.
Precisely, within its framework. It's about, from the source's view, understanding these distinct relational roles and figuring out which ones actually lead to attraction versus friendship.
Okay, let's tackle myth number 3. This is a big one. Women are only after money, looks, or fame. I mean, that's a belief that can be deeply discouraging for a lot of guys.
Absolutely. And this is a common and powerful myth this source really directly challenges. It immediately counters this belief with what it presents as, well, a dose of reality.
How does it counter it?
It argues that if this were universally true, most of us would be single forever. Because let's face it, the vast majority of men don't possess extreme wealth or movie star looks or widespread fame.
Right, that makes sense.
It explicitly states that while those things can attract attention initially, the vast majority of women are looking for an everyday guy like you. The source insists attraction isn't solely reserved for the ultra-rich, the incredibly handsome, or the famous.
But what about the psychological impact of believing that myth?
That's key. The source emphasizes the damaging psychological impact. It argues that internalizing this idea, constantly telling yourself, oh, I don't measure up because I don't have X, Y, or Z external marker, it creates a self-fulfilling prophecy of self-doubt.
How so?
Well, if you believe you don't have what it takes, you're going to approach women hesitantly, insecurely. You'll project that very belief. And that, in turn, makes you less attractive. It becomes a cycle where your belief creates your reality, according to the source.
So the source's proposed solution to this myth is just stop believing it.
Essentially, yes. Ditch it is the phrase used. It argues the real barrier isn't your actual lack of money, looks, or fame, but your belief that those things are the only things women want.
Right.
The source encourages men to shed this limiting belief and instead approach them with confidence, not handicaps. It refocuses your energy away from worrying about external deficiencies and towards cultivating an internal state of self-assurance.
So again, the emphasis is internal. The perceived problem isn't the external lack, but the internal belief about that lack and how it translates into insecure behavior.
That's the consistent thread. Okay, myth number 4. It's hard to meet women.
This feels like another common frustration or belief.
The source is pretty dismissive of this one, especially today. It labels this myth absolutely extinct.
Extinct by?
Well, it backs this up by pointing to the sheer number of ways people can connect now. It highlights the obvious ones like online dating apps, social media, platforms offering access to vast numbers of potential connections.
Sure, the digital world.
But it also reminds the listener of what it calls countless real-world opportunities.
Like
colleges, coffee shops, libraries, clubs, social events, basically anywhere people naturally congregate and interact.
Okay.
So the source's conclusion here is presented as almost like a simple, obvious truth. The opportunities are abundant. You just have to open your eyes and look for them.
So it suggests the difficulty isn't in the availability of women or opportunities,
but maybe in the man's willingness or ability to perceive and then act on those opportunities.
It implies that the belief itself, it's hard to meet women, is more of a mental block or maybe an excuse rather than a reflection of reality, especially with all the modern ways to connect.
Exactly. Within the source's viewpoint, the opportunities exist. The issue is overcoming the inertia or the belief that prevents you from seeing or using them.
Got it. Myth number 5. You're not attractive to the opposite sex. Oof, this one strikes right at a core insecurity for many people.
It really does. And the source addresses this very directly, using a kind of relatable anecdote to illustrate its point.
What's the anecdote?
It asks you, the listener, to consider that phenomenon of the, quote, goofy-looking guy, someone who maybe doesn't fit conventional standards of handsomeness.
Yeah, we probably all know someone like that.
And yet he always seems to have women around him, interacting easily, comfortably.
Right, and you kind of wonder, what's his secret?
And the source's answer, according to its framework, is definitive. It's confidence.
Confidence again?
Yes. The source argues this guy's success isn't rooted in his physical appearance, but in his internal state. He believes he has a lot to offer, and it shows.
How does it show, according to the source?
Well, the source describes confident behavior in this context. This guy has fun in his interactions. He flirts on his terms, which kind of implies he dictates the playful dynamic rather than reacting timidly.
Okay.
And crucially, he doesn't demean himself. He doesn't seek approval or apologize for who he is. He just owns it.
So the source forcefully reinforces its stance that thinking you're not attractive is basically believing a lie.
Exactly. And it ties this back to the overall promise of Seduction Tech, stating that the journey it offers specifically aims to change this fundamental belief about yourself.
So it posits that attractiveness is primarily a function of self-perception and the confidence that flows from it, rather than just objective physical traits.
Precisely. Once again, the source shifts the focus away from external factors and squarely onto the man's internal world, asserting that confidence is the real driver of attraction.
Okay, now, myth number 6. This is one that might be the most controversial claim presented by the source. And again, just want to be crystal clear, we are simply reporting the source's perspective here, not endorsing it or validating it in any way.
absolutely essential to state that. This is where the source presents a viewpoint that definitely challenges some modern social narratives. The myth is equal rights means equal seduction.
Okay. And the source argues.
The source claims that despite significant progress in women's rights, equality in many areas of life, in the specific context of dating and attraction, generally speaking, they still want to be approached, seduced, and often paid for.
Wow. So it's presenting this as a persistent dynamic in heterosexual dating, arguing that women, by and large, are not going to act as the pursuer.
That's the claim, that the expectation remains on the man to initiate, to lead the romantic progression, and often, yes, to handle the financial side of dates.
And the source is quite direct about the consequence if a man disagrees with this or, as it says, has a problem with that.
Very direct. From the source's perspective, if a man isn't willing to step into this traditional initiator role, quote, they'll move on. It frames this not as a value judgment on its part, but as a practical reality of how dating interactions tend to unfold, in its view.
So it characterizes this dynamic as a fact of life you need to accept and work with, not against. It's presented as an observation about the dating landscape that, according to the source, must be acknowledged and navigated if a man wants to be successful using its methods.
Exactly. It's crucial for you, the listener, to understand that this specific source's claim about how these interactions function. We're relaying it impartially as part of our deep dive into its perspective. The source doesn't really delve deep into why this dynamic might persist sociologically. It just states it as a reality to be accepted for practical dating purposes within its system.
Right. It presents it as a practical consideration for success within its framework, regardless of broader societal shifts or anyone's personal preferences about how things maybe should be.
Precisely. Okay, finally, we come to myth number 7. Women want a certain type of guy, and you're not it. This myth really feeds into that feeling of being fundamentally inadequate, or like you're just missing some inherent quality women desire.
The I'm not hisher type feeling.
Exactly. The source tackles this by arguing that the idea of women having some rigid, specific checklist for an ideal man is often just inaccurate.
How so?
It suggests that while women might describe an ideal man using a list of desirable traits, nice, smart, funny, handsome.
Standard list.
Right, but the source claims they don't even truly know what they're looking for. It implies these lists are often superficial or maybe don't capture the deeper, more fundamental drivers of attraction.
Okay, so if that's not what they're truly looking for, according to the source, what is? This is where it presents its deepest truth, right?
Yes. According to the source, the deepest truth, the absolute fundamental core desire that underlies attraction for women is this. And again, direct quote, every woman at her very core wants a man who can please her sexually.
Okay. That is a very bold, very specific, and some might say quite reductionist claim about female desire, focusing very intensely on one particular aspect.
It is presented starkly. The source doesn't elaborate extensively in the provided material on the nuances of how this claimed sexual pleasure translates into broader attraction within its framework, but it posits it as the foundational element.
And it concludes this point with something framed as empowering.
Yes, stemming from this deepest truth, it states that men have that power, the power to please women sexually, but, quote, they don't know it yet.
So the source suggests that the obstacle isn't lacking the fundamental capacity for attraction,
but rather lacking the knowledge or maybe the confidence to access and leverage this intrinsic power it claims men possess.
Okay, so just to recap the myth section, the source systematically goes through these 7 common beliefs. It argues that believing and acting on them is why traditional approaches fail.
Right. It claims these myths lead men astray, focusing on being overly nice, being just an emotional support, worrying excessively about external validation like money or looks.
Feeling like opportunities are scarce, lacking confidence, maybe misunderstanding the dynamic of pursuit.
Or believing they need to fit some specific, unattainable type. And according to the source, the real key, the deepest truth, lies elsewhere, potentially in understanding and leveraging this fundamental sexual dynamic it talks about, coupled with cultivated confidence.
This detailed debunking of myths, from the source's perspective, really clears the ground then for its proposed solution, its blueprint for transformation.
Exactly. Which leads us nicely into the third and final section based on our source material. The path it outlines to becoming the prized man.
Right. This is where Seduction Tech moves from just being a concept to the actual blueprint for change. The source presents this blueprint as the alternative for those who are now maybe convinced that the old, ineffective rules, the ones based on those myths it just debunked, have been working against them.
It's presented as a structured way to learn what the source refers to as the real tricks of the trade.
Tricks of the trade. That phrasing might make some people think it's purely behavioral or maybe manipulative.
It might, but the source insists that seduction tech is much more than just about physical intimacy or getting laid, as it uses that phrasing.
Okay.
It claims the process involves a complete internal transformation, which reinforces that idea we keep hearing from the source, that the change required goes deeper than just learning lines or moves.
It's about fundamentally changing who you are on the inside, according to this source.
That internal focus is a really consistent theme throughout the source's argument. It connects back to its points about confidence being more important than looks, like in Myth 5, or ditching self-doubt from Myth 3.
And the source explicitly promises that its blueprint will help you, the listener, build unshakable self-confidence.
Unshakable. And it emphasizes the impact isn't just confined to dating or interacting with women. The source claims this confidence impacts every area of your life.
Okay, so that's presented as a major side benefit, or maybe even the core benefit, of undergoing this transformation.
Seems like it. Becoming more confident and self-assured, not just romantically, but maybe professionally, socially, personally, too. It reinforces the source's perspective that the fundamental change starts from within. It's an inside-out transformation, according to this narrative.
So the source is presenting this not just as a dating strategy, but potentially as a path to broader personal empowerment, with dating success being a primary visible outcome.
That seems to be the framing, and it links this internal shift to learning practical skills. The source does mention that the blueprint involves learning the secrets successful pickup artists use.
Ah, okay. The PUA angle. How does it frame that?
Well, interestingly, it frames acquiring these secrets not primarily as a means to manipulate, but as a way to facilitate confidence, to enable you to approach and, quote, pick up women on your terms.
On your terms.
The emphasis, according to the source, seems to be on the man being in a position of power and control within the interaction, feeling capable and confident enough to dictate the terms of the engagement, rather than feeling reliant on just hoping the woman approves of his tentative approaches.
So it's about acquiring agency and effectiveness in dating based on these specific secrets or techniques the source promises to reveal.
That appears to be the connection it makes. And returning to one of its initial promises, the source reiterates the claim of speed here.
Right, the fast results.
It states that by following this blueprint, you'll get results at record speed and be able to implement these skills, see changes in no time at all.
And does it suggest this works for different relationship goals?
Apparently so. The source presents this speed and effectiveness as applicable regardless of the man's specific goals. It claims the Seduction Tech blueprint is versatile enough to help achieve results, whether the goal is a one-night stand or a long-term relationship.
So the underlying principles and the internal transformation are foundational, applicable across different outcomes.
That's what the source suggests, that these principles can be applied towards different relationship outcomes as desired by the individual using them.
And the overall kind of culminating outcome, the grand promise presented in this source material.
The big payoff, yeah. It's that when you successfully undergo this transformation, when you discard the myths, adopt the prize mindset, build that unshakable confidence, and learn these secrets, you become the man that every woman desires.
And when that happens,
The source claims simply everything shifts.
everything shifts.
Yeah, signifying a fundamental change in your reality, how you feel about yourself, how women perceive you, the kinds of interactions and opportunities that become available. It's presented as moving from a state of lack and frustration to one of, well, abundance and effortless attraction.
Okay, so to sort of bring all these threads together, the key points from this specific source's perspective are: it identifies this widespread frustration among men using traditional dating methods.
Argues they're ineffective based on harmful myths.
It proposes a pretty revolutionary shift in mindset, adopting that prize mentality to move from chasing to attracting.
Systematically debunks what it sees as 7 core myths holding men back, reframing issues like attractiveness and what it claims women truly desire.
And finally, it presents Seduction Tech as its blueprint for achieving this change, through a combination of internal transformation, focusing on confidence.
And learning specific techniques it calls secrets or tricks of the trade. promising fast results and ultimately turning you into the prized man who attracts women naturally, leading to a fundamental positive shift in your life.
And again, cannot stress this enough, our deep dive today has been a focused exploration strictly of the claims, the arguments, and the perspective presented within this one specific source material.
Exactly. We've guided you through its observations about the dating landscape, its critique of conventional wisdom, and the detailed path it proposes for overcoming challenges and achieving success, all as framed by the source itself.
We've analyzed its viewpoint, unpacked what it means by the prize mentality, its reasoning behind debunking those 7 myths, and the components of its Seduction Tech blueprint for becoming the prized man.
Right. We've really stuck to reporting on the content provided, delving into the details as presented within the source's specific framework.
Okay. So, as we wrap up this deep dive into this particular perspective, here is a final, maybe provocative thought for you to consider, drawn directly from the content of the source we've just explored.
Okay.
The source makes that very bold, perhaps reductionist claim that the deepest truth is that women, at their core, want a man who can please them sexually. And it asserts that men already possess this power, but just don't know it yet. It also talks quite a bit about learning tricks of the trade and achieving internal transformation, particularly building unshakable self-confidence. So here's the thought. Based purely on this source's argument, does the power it refers to truly lie more in specific learned techniques and tricks? Or is it fundamentally rooted in that internal shift, the self-belief, the confidence, recognizing a power it claims you already possess?
That's a great question. How do those pieces fit together within the narrative the source itself has constructed? The external techniques versus the internal state?
Yeah, and how are both of those positioned in relation to that core assertion it makes about desire? What are the implications within the source's own logic for framing attraction so strongly through the lens of this specific deepest truth, alongside its heavy emphasis on confidence and learned skills?
Something to chew on, definitely. Think about how those elements interact within the source's model.
We encourage you to continue your own exploration and critical thinking about these ideas, specifically as they were presented in the source material we examined today.
Thanks for joining us for this deep dive into a particular and quite specific viewpoint on modern dating dynamics.